Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them,
"Pray that you will not fall into temptation."
Then he withdrew about a stone's throw beyond and knelt down and prayed.
"Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me.
Yet not my will, but yours be done."
Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him.
And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly.
And his sweat were like drops of blood falling to the ground.
When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples,
He found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow.
He asked them,
"Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation."
Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Am I leading a rebellion," said Jesus, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled." Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man, wearing nothing but a linen garment, was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this man-made temple, and in 3 days will build another, not made by man.' Yet even then their testimony did not agree." Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, "Prophesy!" And the guards took him and beat him.
While Peter was out below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him and said,
You also were with that Nazarene, Jesus.
but
He denied it.
I don't know or understand what you're talking about. And he went out to the entryway.
When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, This fellow is one of them.
Again,
he denied it.
After a little while, those standing near said to Peter,
Surely you are one of them, for you are Galilean.
and Peter began to call curses on himself, and he swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about.
Immediately, the rooster crowed a second time.
Peter remembered the words that Jesus spoke to him.
Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times.
He broke down, wept.
Very early in the morning, the chief priests, the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate.
Are you the king of the Jews? Pilate asked.
Then Jesus replied, Yes, it is as you say.
Chief priests accused him of many things, so again Pilate asked,
Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of.
But Jesus still made no reply.
and Pilate was amazed. Now it was a custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Pilate asked,
Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?
He said this, knowing that it was out of envy that the chief priest had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead.
What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?
Crucify him!
Why? What crime has he committed?
but they shouted all the louder.
Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!
Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!
Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them.
And Jesus was flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
They led Jesus away to the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together a whole company of soldiers.
They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, Hail, hail, King of the Jews!
spit on him.
They fell on their knees and paid homage to him.
Hail, hail, King of the Jews!
And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple
Robe and put his own
clothes on him.
And then they led him over to be crucified.
A certain man from Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way from the country when they forced him to carry the cross.
They led Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. It offered him a mixture of wine and myrrh, but he did not take it.
Dividing his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get.
It was
The third hour when they crucified him.
the written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews."
They
Crucified 2 robbers with him.
One on his right,
and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying,
So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself! In the same way, the chief priests and teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let this Christ, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe.
those crucified with him
also heaped insults on him.
At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land. Until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice,
Eli! Eli! Lama sabachthani! Which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?
When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah."
One man ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink.
Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down.
And then with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last.
the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom.
And when the centurion, who stood there in front of Jesus, heard his cry and saw how he died, he said,
Surely, this man was the Son of God. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
The thread of Christ's blood that was shed for us doesn't begin when we look at the last week of Christ. It begins in the first few pages of Scripture in Genesis and follows through with the creation of the nation of Israel and through the exodus of his people out of Egypt and in the tabernacle where God's presence was with his people and all the way through to the days where Jesus was marched through Jerusalem to his death. And I would even say that those threads continue for 2,000 years of history to us, where we come to the Lord's table and we look at what Jesus was doing in that upper room when he stood there with his apostles, and they came to that bread and they came to that glass of wine, and they took those two elements. He took those two elements and he said, all the while you've been waiting. For 1,200 years you've been waiting. And the one who you have been waiting for is me. And for us tonight, the reality is, you may not have even known, that you were waiting. But Jesus is saying, I'm here for you. When we come to this table tonight, there's something that we hear in 1 Corinthians that we know that we're supposed to do while we look at this table, while we observe this. And that is that we are supposed to examine our own lives. And I would like to challenge us to pour our hearts out to God. Just share with Him. What is it that you're going through? Allow for yourself to have a moment of prayer to say, God, I need you in this moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the table open for you. And you may come. And you may partake in the table. And when you're through with taking communion tonight, you're dismissed. And the reason we do that is because this is Friday, but Sunday's come. And we're excited about this weekend.